Welcome to another session of Business Startup Training. We're going to look at recession or depression. What's the meaning? This is presented by an accounting lecturer. Let's look at this picture. It has on it waves, and here we see various booms, and we would also consider it to be busts. Okay, so the booms here are the peaks, the various peaks, and the bust would be the trough or the lower end. The first boom here we can consider on this graph is in the 1800s, where we had steam engine and cotton, the drivers of economic growth. In the 1850s, we had railway steel driving economic growth. In the 1900s, we have electrical and engineering and chemistry driving economic growth. And then in the 1950s, we have petrochemical and automobiles driving economic growth. In 1990, information technology driving economic growth. Right now, in the 2020, we would have social media driving economic growth at this time. So our aim is, by the end of this session, we have a better understanding of depression and the meaning for business. Now, what is a recession and what's a depression? How does a recession or depression affect business? What can we learn from history? And then we will conclude. Now, what's a recession? A recession is a period of temporary economic decline during which trade, industry activity are reduced, generally identified by a fall in GDP in 2 successive quarters. So once GDP falls for 2 consecutive quarters, we can consider the economy is in recession. Now, in terms of depression in economics, a depression is a sustained long-term downturn in economic activity in one or more of the economies. It is more severe economic downturn than a recession, and it is a slowdown in economic activity over the course of a normal business cycle. So a depression is a downturn in the economy for more than 2 consecutive periods. So 3, 4, 5 consecutive periods of decline is a depression. Now let's have a look at the concept of quarters. Now, January, February, March is a quarter. April, May, June is a quarter. June, July, September, October, November, December. So let's look at this example. In a normal economics, let's say the first quarter, January, February, March, 1% is economic growth then. And then second quarter, 2%. Third quarter, 2%. Fourth quarter, 3%. Overall, the economy grew by 2%. So that would be the normal situation if the economy is growing, if Corona was not in the picture. Now let's have a look at the situation where we see recession or depression creeping in. So first quarter we have growth of 3%. Then in the second quarter we have negative growth of 1%, negative growth of 2%, and negative growth of 3%. So that overall see a contraction of negative 0.75. So the GDP of the economy actually contracted by 0.75, by negative 0.75. So that is not necessarily good. And we can see that the last 3 quarters means that this economy is in depression. The first 3 quarters would be would incorporate the 2 negatives, which means a recession. But when you consider all 4 quarters, it would be considered a depression. Now, in terms of the history, let's have a look at this because that's important. Recession was recorded in the 1960s, 1970s, 1975, 1980, 1983, 1993, 2004, and 2008. We can see here a pattern whereby recession seems to take place generally every 10 years. In some instances, 5 years, but generally it tends to be about, on average, every 10 years. So we can estimate that the next recession maybe in 2030, we can forecast it, and maybe 2040. So that would be something that we can look forward to, because in terms of business and economics, every 10 years, 5 to 10 years, you have a move in economic wave. So it goes up and down accordingly. Now let's have a look at the depression, which took place in 1929. So at 1929, we can see that the economy started the recession was creeping in. Then it's more pronounced in 1930, continued in 1931, 1932. It's 1933 was where it started to the decline stopped. So that's about maybe a 3-year period, and then it increased in 1934, 35. It recovered to pre-levels in 1936. 1937, it peaked again and then came back down in 1938 and then has recovered since. So we can see that recession tend to take about, well, a depression in this instance tend to take about 3 years to recover to the level it was. And then generally to get back to the level, the decline takes about 3 years, and to recover to the level it was would be about 7 years. So based on this graph, that's what it's taking, saying really. So again, we can just look at the major things. It started in 1929, ended in 1933, again about 3-year period. The growth returned in 1936, which is about 7 years from the very beginning. Again, we had a blip in 1938. So those are the main things to take into account. How does recession or depression affect business? We can see that demand for non-essential goods will fall. There's a fall in demand. High levels of unemployment. Business will close in large scale. Economic output will fall. Inflation in some instances, and in some instances high inflation. Credit availability falls, and there will be high interest rate. In some instances low interest rate, but a black market you'll have high interest rate because people are not able to qualify for normal loans. What can we learn from history? Recession or depression can last for 3 to 7 years. The cycle tends to be every 10 years. Business cycles holds true. The economic waves. The economy has a wave and it goes up and down accordingly. So in terms of this, that idea of the economic wave will hold true. Recession creates an opportunity for business, for innovation. For those businesses that innovate, they tend to be able to survive. And Great Recession in 1930s, there was a high birth rate. What will happen in 2020, we do not know, but we may have one. What can we learn? So we learn what a recession is. We say 2 periods or 2 quarters of a decline in economic growth will cause a recession. More than 2, which is 3, 4, 5 and above, will cause a depression. How does a recession or a depression affect businesses? We say that there will be a fall in unemployment, fall in employment, or which is an increase in unemployment. Prices will increase, which will be high inflation. We will also have credit will be not as available as it would normally in normal situation, and so there will be a lot of turmoil. What can we learn from history? We realize that there was a depression in 1929 to 1933. Lasted about 3 years of decline and then recovered in 7 years. And it tends to take place for every 10 years. We might have a recession or depression accordingly. So those are the things. I hope you like it. Share, subscribe. Thank you.